Welcome back to the On Adventure podcast. I'm Josh Self, and I'll be your host. Today's conversation is one that really stuck with me. I'm joined by Brian Warren, someone whose life has been defined by movement, risk, reinvention, and a deep connection to the mountains. Now, if you've been around this show for a while, you know that we love stories that highlight the everyday explorer spirit. And Brian's lived it fully. He thru-hiked the Appalachian Trail just 4 days after graduating high school. He moved to Jackson Hole sight unseen, chasing a calling that he couldn't yet name. And over the next 2 decades, he would go on to become an elite mountain guide, leading clients through rugged terrain on multiple continents from the Tetons to the Himalaya. But what makes Brian's story even more compelling is where he is now, navigating a completely different adventure, leaving the outdoor industry, becoming a father, and stepping into the world of financial services. This is a guy who's building the next version of his life while still carrying the lessons from every climb, every close call, and every moment of solitude above treeline. We talk about identity, confidence, imposter syndrome, and the unique power of presence, what it means to be fully where your feet are, even when the terrain changes. So whether you're in the mountains, on a trail, or just figuring out what's next, I think you're really going to connect with this one. Let's dive in. All right. Brian Warren, welcome to the On Adventure podcast. And, I don't have enough time to kind of go into the details about how our paths crossed, but this is one of those serendipitous things that if I hadn't started doing this thing called a podcast, my day job as a financial planner, this thing was a creative outlet, a different idea. If I hadn't done that, the chances of our paths crossing would probably be significantly less than a small percentage. So as it stands, you and I connected on LinkedIn and then had a really great phone conversation about some of the life transitions that you're going through right now that I'm looking forward to talking about. But the more we talked, the more I realized the arc of your life really is one of the everyday explorer. We'll get into the details of it, but I think this will be a perfect conversation to add to the general consciousness of the On Adventure podcast, and we'll likely see a similar thread through your life and pursuits and what has driven you and what you've gotten out of that I've seen in people that have biked across Europe and, ridden an elliptical machine across the United States and hiked the highest mountains in the world. And all of it is painting on a different canvas, but with similar threads. So that's a very long-winded start to say, thanks for being on my podcast today.
Yeah. Thank you, Josh. It's obviously a pleasure to be here. And as you mentioned, I think there might have been some universal timing for you and I connecting. There's one thing I've learned over the years, that it is a small world. And I'd like to think if it wasn't this connection, maybe crossing paths on or staying at the same shelter on the Appalachian Trail.
Yes.
with kids in tow. So who knows? Again, I can't thank you enough. You've been a great resource and figure of support these past couple of months. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, cool. Well, let's start with just a little bit about who you are and where you're at and anything you want to say about yourself.
Oh man. Okay. So where I'm at currently is very far from who I often associate myself as. So maybe I'll give a little lead up and some broad stroke, let's just say snapshots into the past. I mentioned the Appalachian Trail. I think we probably both have a great passion for what that can bring to people's lives, whether it's a day hike or a thru hike. So yeah, growing up, born in Atlanta, Georgia, very far from the iconic mountain ranges of the globe. Had a lot of exposure as a younger boy, teenager, right? So everything from Boy Scouts to, I attribute lots of birthday parties in rock climbing gyms to where I am at today.
Oh, is that right?
I think that was the era. Yeah, I think about the late 90s when a lot of those gyms were popping up, and it just sort of became a theme there for a while. And I remember going to a number of birthday parties, rock climbing gym, asking mom and dad, When can we go to REI? I want to buy a harness, want to buy a rope. Have no idea what I'm going to do with it yet.
I just want it.
I just want it. I want it all. I want all the ice axes and crampons and so yeah, it was growing up in the South. I had no idea it would lead to where I'm at today and some of my accomplishments. But I think the through line was always feeling adventurous. I had a number of family members that were fairly adventurous. I'd always heard stories from uncles and a couple of both sides, my grandfathers, both sides of hunting out west, specifically near Pinedale, Wyoming, and the camping trips, again, Boy Scouts I mentioned. And to get to, I guess, the high school years, I really had it set in my mind that I was going to hike the Appalachian Trail post-graduation. Now, I had no idea what that meant, right? I can still say that sentence now, and I have no idea how I thought it was a good idea, a bad idea, what it entailed. And that was truly the catalyst of the, my current and past trajectory. And it was what I consider just, launching into the uncharted, into the unknown. And it really set me up for being able to embrace the unknown, right? And the uncertainty. And so you can imagine, you spend a lot of time in these areas, but being in Georgia and based on my high school graduation date, it wasn't feasible to hike your traditional Georgia to Maine based on when Baxter State Park closes in October. And so I went Maine to Georgia. So 4 days after high school graduation, my dad and I flew up to Maine, had a couple of nights in the hotel and getting my pack ready and figuring out that it was way too heavy. And I have no idea how I'm going to get through these first few days. And some folks may know the first section in Maine, it's called the 100-mile wilderness. It might be your first section or last section, roughly about 8 to 10 days of hiking without any sort of resupply option. And I'll just say it, this was the tipping point for me. It was getting dropped off. I had climbed Katahdin the day before, and then there we were, roadside. The trail's right there. I'm getting out of the rental car with my dad. Pack is super heavy, and say our goodbyes. And this is me launching into what I figure 4 or 5 months of backpacking, and obviously a lot more than that came out of it. But when you'll appreciate this as a parent, I walked into the woods, and there's in my mind, it still has flashing lights around it. It obviously doesn't, but this big sign, entering the 100-mile wilderness, like, beware, are you prepared? And so I literally turned around, walked back out to the road, about 50, 60 yards, and dad is gone, rental car is gone. And I'm just standing there under my heavy pack.
Oh my gosh. So if he had been there, you think you would have been done?
Oh my, I don't know. I think that's where I can't thank him enough. Like if there was one thing my dad did was like, this sounds crazy. My dad left me on the roadside in Maine and literally said, see you at home.
That is great. And you're right. As a parent, that is, God, it's so hard to do. So hard to let your kids go, walk right into the teeth of something hard.
I can't imagine, being a new parent a year in, I can't imagine my father I was 18, again, 4 days out of high school, not really having any sort of clue of what this whole team sport of life is about. And I think he did the greatest thing he ever could for me. He drove away. He said, okay, you were on your own. And
wow.
So
was this like a thing you had to convince your parents of that you were going to go do?
Sure.
Okay. So
this was a big distraction that was highly ignored for 2 or 3 years during high school. And I guess I didn't mention, we moved out of Atlanta around 1996, 1997, moved up to Northeast Georgia. And so that move gave me the option, right? The options. It really opened my eyes to like, hey, we're kind of in the mountainous regions, mm-hmm. right? The southern Appalachians. And it just gave me even more I guess, excitement to get out and explore, right? So it was during my high school years. Again, I talked about rock climbing gyms, but it was very formative for me of actually going rock climbing and going backpacking for a 2 or 3 day trip along the Appalachian Trail and surrounding areas. So yes, during high school, my parents basically ignored this idea for most of my junior, senior year.
Where in Atlanta did you live?
We were pretty much born and raised around Stone Mountain.
Oh yeah.
And I'm very proud of the Scottish heritage on my mother's side. Her maiden name is it looks like looks like Harriston. We always say Hurston, really strong, Scottish Hurston. But there is a Harrison Road, and so my mom proudly, she's very quick to tell people that her family has been in the Atlanta area since the late 1700s.
Wow. Stone Mountain's a cool area. I went to high school in Marietta.
Oh, nice.
Walton High
Nice.
School. And
Yep.
so we went over to Stone Mountain for the laser light show several times. And
Love
I graduated in 96. So that would have been around the same time that you were there. So,
yeah, it was definitely the post-Olympic
Yep.
exodus. It was, my parents they had a number of friends and family in the Northeast Georgia area. And it was, I don't want to say pre-retirement, but it was setting them up to get away from the city before they thought they would make that move. And so I'm glad they did it. It obviously introduced myself to that area, Western North Carolina, Northeast Georgia. And so again, it was a great exposure. So,
well, and I think a lot of people would be surprised at just how rugged and rough that part of Northern Georgia, Western North Carolina, and in fact, the time that I've done the sections of that from several years ago, we did Blood Mountain south to Amicalola, and in the middle of June, it was sweltering. There was no relief from the heat and humidity. Even in the Green Tunnel, it was really hot. Rattlesnakes on the trail. My buddy that was hiking with us got stung by a yellow jacket, almost went into anaphylactic shock in the middle of nowhere, no cell phone service. And so that section, I have some very distinct memories.
I appreciate hearing. Yeah, it's rugged. You don't think about, obviously, the Appalachians, some of the oldest mountains on this planet, but yeah, I've seen so many mountain ranges, but I would definitely attest to like sections of Georgia, North Carolina, all the way up through the East Coast. There is it's real.
It's real, yeah. So let's kind of condense the thru-hike down. Did you finish it?
I did, yeah. So the big takeaways for me, and I think this will help maybe lead into the biggest chapter of my life. So you can imagine, 18-year-old, I was hiking by myself, but obviously meeting people from all walks of life. I did complete the trail. I had I had to hit the pause button a couple of times. I had a pretty gnarly ingrown toenail.
Hard to walk on one of those.
Hard, yeah. Especially, when your job is to, okay, how many miles do I have to get in today to get to the next water source and shelter? So with all that said, what I walked away from is I met folks, the demographic that really stands out. Obviously, still close friends with many people that I hiked and met that year in 2000. But the outdoor educator, so meeting people that came from the Outward Bound realm or the Knowles National Outdoor Leadership School realm, those are the folks, whether they were taking maybe time off or a sabbatical, or maybe they were doing some section hiking. I had never been introduced to that. And that was the standout. And that was honestly, when I say it was the takeaway, I came home, and of course, Mom and Dad were, okay, now what's the next step? Where are you going to go to school? And I said, well, I'm going to go to school maybe in Alaska on a Knowles course. And I just ordered the catalog, hoping it'll be here next week, and I could flip through the pages of all the courses and curriculum across the globe. And I'd love to find a mountaineering course out in going back to Wyoming or And so the next phase of this, Josh, was truly booking a 38-day Alaska mountaineering course pretty much as soon as I came home
Wow.
from hiking the trail.
And again, mom and dad was supportive, or was there a sales pitch that went on?
There's definitely, I think this is where my sales skills have yeah, they've just been layered on throughout the years. I had no idea it was beginning back in those early years. So convincing them that, hey, I think this is a great idea. This will open my eyes more to the outdoor education world. And again, we all know the intimate conversations that happen in the outdoors. So when I was, again, meeting these folks from these areas of expertise, really getting to understand what they did and what they brought and how they bettered other people's lives, it just spoke to me. It's that whole servant leadership mentality that I wasn't aware of at the time, but it was what I was gravitating towards. And hearing about Knowles instructors working in the Himalaya or sailing in Baja or backpacking in the Wind River Range, I was like, this is amazing. Like, people get paid, and this can actually be a job. So again, came home, got the Knowles catalog in the mail, and just started highlighting some stuff. And I was never shy about working hard. All through high school, I was already working at a lumber yard and waiting tables and just trying to put money into a savings account, obviously to help with hiking the Appalachian Trail, but future endeavors. And so getting back to that, framing houses, again, waiting tables. And you mentioned Blood Mountain. I was even working at the Hiawassee store over there.
Oh yeah, right, the road crossing.
Yep, mountain crossing store. And so yeah, I think 3 or 4 jobs trying to save up for this Knowles course, and that launched me into 19 years old, flying up to Alaska. This is where I really start to see the theme when I look back. It was like, pull the trigger, launch the boat, insert set analogy, but just get there and be present, and you'll start to figure it out, right? You'll start to lay out the perimeter of the puzzle. Don't worry about all the puzzle pieces on the table currently. Just be present and put yourself in that position. So again, it was, I didn't have the opportunity to have my father with me then, but he was happy to take me to the airport, a couple of large duffel bags, and I remember.
And he drove away again.
Pretty much drove away again. I have to talk to him about that.
I know.
Yeah. So Knowles course in Alaska. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on that for sure, but I came home from that experience and we were introduced. It was fairly early in the spring that year. And so the instructors had opted, instead of snowshoes, they had opted to put us on some, what we call approach skis. Again, massive, heavy backpacks. So got introduced to all things glacial mountaineering, alpine mountaineering, what we call expedition behavior, working with small teams. The end of those trips, the instructors always basically say, here's point A and point B. We'll see you there in a couple of days. Best of luck. I was voted within my group expedition leader, right? I was definitely one of the younger folks on that course. Real quick side note, going back to the trail, a lot of folks know that people do have trail names. Mm-hmm. I looking back, I have to commend not only myself, but obviously folks around me. I was often getting called Papa or Papa Bear. That wasn't my official trail name, but knowing that at 18 years old, people were recognizing, some sort of leadership dynamic mm-hmm. and leadership potential. But yeah, so
was that because are you like a take charge kind of guy, or is it, what was it that you were doing or saying, or the experience of it that made people look to you innately as the leader of the group?
Oh, I love that question, because I still don't know the answer, but I know my personality, and something I've always prided myself on was doing the hard to make it easy, right? So not only easy for myself, but easy for those around me. And I think the way I was raised, I joke that, my brother and I joked that the saying was always, chores are your fastest path to freedom, right? So I think having that discipline, knowing what needs to get done, and I've always said, organize to maximize, right? And so that question on the Appalachian Trail, people would say, hey, how many miles to the shelter tonight? And I was the one with the data book. They're like, oh, it's 13.7 miles. I think we can do it in this amount of time. We have 2 water sources ahead of us. this climb is probably going to take us a little bit longer. It's hotter today. And so my brain was already in this logistical mindset of
super planner.
Super planner. Yeah, I appreciate that. That's probably the best description.
So what was your trail name?
It was Merlin.
Merlin.
And it was one of those, it revolves around trail magic. And for those that know about trail magic,
one of the greatest things in the world.
One of the absolute greatest things in the world. And it's the only thing I could say is anyone that enjoys a cold beer at the end of the day, just times that by, 10x, right? So it revolved around trail magic in the way that before my father left me on the side of the road, we had picked up some hikers that were finishing, or at least finishing a section. We drove them back from Baxter State Park into the town of, Millinocket there. And we thought, well, we got to buy him some food and get him a piece of pie. And I didn't know what trail magic was at that point, but I remember the hiker, he basically said, look, if you get to New Hampshire and nothing has happened that spawns on a specific trail name, think about something in the sort of enchanting, magical realm. And so I got to New Hampshire, nothing too crazy had happened, no major trips or tumbles. And so Merlin, I ended up adopting Merlin as my trail name.
That's pretty good. I like it.
Yeah. But yeah, so that through line of being recognized as a leader, then being recognized as a leader on my Knowles course, right? That was a very proud moment when you know that the folks around you and your Knowles instructors that are obviously veterans in the industry, they recognize and they see, and they're there to applaud and say, congratulations, we want you to take on these next couple of days. And that has really served me well. Again, I that servant leadership mentality, because I'm never one that says like, I need the title, or I need the office, or I need to have the specific hat, right? It's really, what can I do to better those around me? And the byproduct will be bettering myself, right? Coming out of that Knowles course, I'm going to keep jumping along because these stories could easily take up half the day, but being introduced to the ski touring equipment got me thinking about, okay, this is an amazing way to move through the mountains. I've never, obviously crampons and ice axes, that was all new, but ski touring equipment just spoke to my soul. And I was fortunate that I had an aunt and uncle that introduced my brother and I to skiing at a pretty young age. We'd been out to Colorado a couple of times. And so just like when I came home from the trail, coming home from the Knowles course, I already had the idea. I said, Mom, Dad, you guys have all talked about this place called Wyoming. And I never got a chance to go out there as a kid. The uncles and grandparents were always out there on these hunting trips. I think I'm going to move to Jackson, Wyoming.
Oh my gosh.
Sight unseen, right? And of course it was just them looking at me like, at this point, I think they're like, okay, well, just let us know when and where, and we'll support you. There really wasn't a whole lot of pushback on that one. And so I got my, let's call it logistics in line. I started doing some homework. I recognized that there was a job fair that the Jackson Mountain Resort puts on every October. And I was like, okay, if I can get out there before October and get to the job fair, have a little bit of money in the bank, and start looking for housing. Now, this was in 2001. I can't imagine looking for housing in Jackson Hole. And
it basically doesn't exist anymore, does it? I mean,
yeah,
that's crazy.
Not much different. I lived in a Super 8 motel for the first month.
Did you really?
I went on to rent everything under the sun in that town. I even rented a mudroom for about a year, just because it had bathroom and kitchen privileges. But I could put my thermarest right there in the mudroom and be out of the way.
Oh my gosh.
So
wow.
Yeah, coming out of Knowles, obviously a big history relating back to Wyoming. Paul Petzel, who started Knowles, the organization being based out of Lander, Wyoming. So obviously a lot of connections to Jackson and the Tetons. And talking with my Knowles instructors in Alaska, just hearing about their stories of the Tetons, again, just sparked this immense interest. And I made my mind up. I'm whatever whatever happens from here, I just got to get out there and be present and see how things, if the puzzle pieces will fall in place, which I have no idea how that worked out, Josh. I mean, that was, we've all heard the adage of, I moved to a ski town for one winter 20 years ago. And that's truly what happened. And going from the trail to Knowles to moving to Jackson, I immediately started thinking, okay, how do I prep myself in order to maybe take the Knowles instructor course, right? And start working for institutions like Knowles or Outward Bound. Mm-hmm. And then I was quickly introduced to the realm of mountain guiding, right? And you think about very similar industry, but you have to start checking all the prereqs, right? So moving out to Jackson, working at the ski resort, I've got 127 amazing stories about being a lifty and not really knowing how to ski very well and working on the upper mountain. Being the kid from Georgia that didn't even have a proper hat. I mean, I remember walking out, it was -32 and I'm out there in sunglasses and everyone's looking at me like, this poor kid is going to die.
You're going to die.
Like he's truly going to die. We are going to watch this person perish over the next 17 minutes in -30-degree weather.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I think fast forwarding, I know we want to get on the topic of sort of the leadership, the adventure mentality, the uncharted, getting into the uncharted. It was a very fast pace going from my Knowles course to moving to Jackson sight unseen, putting myself in position, started taking avalanche safety courses, started taking wilderness first responder courses, started taking, leave no trace courses, all these things I recognized that I was going to need to become a Knowles instructor. But I also recognized that there were guide services, right? So many Knowles instructors wore different hats throughout the year. Some summers they would be busy guiding in the Tetons and beyond, and then they would jump seasons and they would be a Knowles instructor in other venues. And I was quickly introduced to the American Mountain Guides Association and the steps that it would take to start working towards that and basically build up a personal portfolio, right, of recreational climbing and skiing. So I knew I was going to have to come into this arena, whether it was Knowles or the AMGA, with a pretty high level of climbing and skiing. And again, being introduced to Teton Range, being introduced to the approach skis in Alaska, I just started putting it all together that winter. And the joke is, I told my dad, I said, hey, I think I'm going to have to use the credit card. I know it's for emergencies. I've been doing pretty well so far in my budget, but I do need this specific set of skis, right? Skis, bindings, boots. And so the joke has always been, he found out what I spent and he said, I can't believe you spent this amount on skis without bindings. And the family joke is always, well, Dad, actually you spent X amount for skis without bindings.
Yeah.
And so with that said, Josh, I ended up buying, I could only afford one pair of skis. And so I bought a pair of approach or touring skis, touring bindings, and touring boots. Not your ideal setup to learn on for those that grew up skiing.
Well, explain the difference.
Yeah. So your typical, most people that have skied, right? Pretty brutal apparatus, the ski boot, very stiff, very little flexibility, and they're really meant to go downhill. And when you're putting on what's considered a touring boot or an AT boot, lots of flexibility. It has what we call a walk mode, very, sometimes less buckles, less plastic. It's really meant to go uphill, right? So it seems crazy, but uphill skiing. And lighter boot, again, very soft, doesn't give you the structure you need in a downhill boot. And so learning to ski on a uphill ski boot, I like to think I'm a pretty damn good skier at this point. I never took ski lessons and have obviously, we'll get into it, but 13 seasons as a heli-ski guide, ski guided folks off the top of the Grand Teton, had my skis in the Himalaya, South America, you name it, skied a lot of different mountains and conditions. And I attribute it to, I basically learned on a set of toy skis, right?
Well, so I mean that's a huge jump though. So and maybe this is kind of the overall arc of your story in general, but you don't just go from toy skis to skiing down the Tetons. So, I mean, how did you or yeah, how did you find yourself in slightly more and more and more difficult skiing situations? Was it
Yeah,
intentional or
very intentional.
it was
Very
intentional?
intentional. I would say a lot of logic behind that. Definitely got myself in a lot of trouble over the years. Still open to getting myself into trouble when it comes to skiing and climbing. But yeah, it was a very, I think coming off the Knowles course and then folks I was exposed to in Jackson, suddenly I'm working at the ski resort, I'm in the locker room, you have the backcountry guides coming through at the end of the day, you've got it's pretty famed, roster of ski patrol folks coming out of Jackson. And so you're in this room and you're just recognizing like, wow, like a lot of these guys started at Knowles. A lot of these guys were mountain guides or still are mountain guides. Some of these guys and these men and women are they are the veteran heli-ski guides,
Mm.
right, in our country. And many of them are mountain guides on the international level. So it's one of those, I think, moments where people realize if you put yourself in specific rooms and you know that you're not the smartest one, you're bound to learn something, right?
Mm.
And I started knocking on the door of Jacksonville Mountain Guides. And I went in there numerous times, literally having the conversation. Hey, what is it like? What's the process? Like, is there an apprentice level? And more or less being laughed out of the office.
Mm.
Great friends with many of those folks that laughed at me way back when. And then I think just to get to where again, another tipping point for me, and I think universal timing, similar to how I think we met, I enrolled myself in an AMGA, American Mountain Guides Association, ski guides course. So it's the first course within the ski mountaineering discipline. And luck would have it that my instructor, Rob Hess, was the owner of Jacksonville Mountain Guides.
Okay.
And the other instructor was a dear friend. His name is Joe Vallone. Many folks in the guiding world obviously know Joe. Many clients know Joe. If you've ever been to the Alps, specifically in Le Grave, fairly famed ski mountaineering venue, Joe's kind of the mayor, right? He knows everyone. He's been there. He's done many first descents. And so here I am, pretty young, very young, right? I got my toy skis and I'm going into this AMGA course with Rob Hess and Joe Vallone. During that 10-day course, all I'm hearing from Joe is these enchanting stories about the French Alps and Le Grave and Chamonix and Zermatt and all these amazing venues that obviously this is where mountaineering and alpinism was born, centuries ago. Now, of course, having Rob Hess, I was like, I think this is it. I think I'm going to be able to maybe leverage this into an introduction to Jacksonville Mountain Guides. And obviously, I can get in that in a second. But coming out of that ski guides course, talking with Joe, I said, what would it be like to move to Le Grave? Like, what does it look like? How does, what's going on there? Is there opportunities for folks like myself looking to apprentice and maybe tag on and become look for mentors, right? Work with some mentors. So fast forward about, I don't know, 8 or 9 months after that ski guides course, I started thinking, okay, how do I get myself to Le Grave? And so the next winter, once again, sight unseen, no place to live, no real plan, packed up all the ski equipment, and I reached out to Joe and some other folks that I knew there, and I said, hey, I'm gonna move to Le Grave for the winter. And I remember, and this is skipping ahead obviously, but once I finally got there, planes, trains, bus, getting off the bus, it was like 9 or 10 p.m., shoving my duffel bags and ski bag under a park bench, walking down the one main street of Le Grave, and I see the sign for the bar, Le Pub, and I go in, and there's Joe Vallone playing the drums. Famous, he's pretty famous for his music there, and outside of guiding, always doing something with percussion. So I tell that story because, again, it's just this continuation of put yourself in that place, just be present, and things will follow. Again, no real plan. And I have so many great relationships and stories that evolved out of what ended up being about 3 or I guess 4 winters I spent between Le Grave and Chamonix. But then going back, obviously meeting Rob Hess, and that relationship ultimately led to, yes, I did get employed by Jacksonville Mountain Guides. And that allowed me to really start seeing the path forward of, okay, this is what this profession is. This is
Did you
dedicated.
spend winters in Europe and then back in Jackson for summers?
Correct.
And
Yeah.
so
So
when
I
you're back
was,
in Jackson, you got in with the guiding company.
I did. Yeah.
Okay.
So I ended up working prior to moving to Le Grave that first winter. I was already putting in some part-time work with Jacksonville Mountain Guides and getting introduced. And ultimately, my very first Grand Teton trip, I did get to work with Rob. I got to apprentice under him. It was a 4-day trip. I'll never forget it. We had a mother and a young son, and successfully got them up the Grand. And you can imagine, I mean,
Yeah.
20 years old, coming off the Grand Teton with here's Rob Hess, this guy has summited Everest without oxygen, longtime veteran heli-ski guide, longtime
Wow.
Jackson Hole Ski Patrol, Jackson Hole Backcountry Guy, technical director of the AMGA, like wearing so many esteemed hats. And I got to, again, spend time with him in some of my first few forays into guiding. And it just launched from there. The relationships and the connections that were made starting to chip away at the AMGA courses and exams. I think we had talked a little bit prior to this call, right? Like being in so-called the trenches with a cohort, right? Those relationships last a lifetime.
Yeah, I come back to this a lot in the conversations, but my previous guest, Matt Walker, which I think
Mm-hmm.
Matt, but his psychology background overlaid on his outdoor experiences, I love the way he puts things into words. But his 5 elements of adventure, the fifth part of that is companionship. It's the people that make it something a true adventure, partly because we never do anything on our own. There's no such thing as a solo adventure usually. I'm sure there's people that but I mean, even along the way, you have support, you have
Mm-hmm.
encouragers, you have people that open doors for you. So I think it's really hard to make the case that there's a solo
Yeah.
effort towards anything. But his question to me was, think about the adventures that you've done that stand out the most. Were there were there friends, family, people with you, or were you by yourself? Like
Right.
that's easy. I
Yeah.
I
Pretty
remember
easy.
kind of remember doing the solo things, but it's the things that I was with my son or my buddy or my family
Totally.
that imprinted that on my brain. So that's interesting. You're coming up with that same thread that was already shown itself from the Appalachian Trail to Jackson to the next things that you did. So let's kind of jump ahead a little bit because
Mm-hmm.
you ended up going through these courses and being apprenticed and becoming a world-class guide that was doing things around the globe. So talk, if you would, maybe some of the pursuits that you did that stand out to you and why they
Mm-hmm.
stand out to you.
Yeah. No, great. I appreciate that, Josh, because again, it's when I think back, it happened so fast, right? The folks I was around, the companionship, the mentors, just the learning and educating in real time, right? So I was able to latch on, obviously, right? I mentioned folks like Rob Hess and just countless of others. So jumping forward, going through AMGA courses, certifications, you end up training and guiding in all different venues, sort of across the American West into the Canadian Rockies, obviously taking courses, had a couple of courses in Chamonix, France. And with that comes the options and opportunities to start guiding elsewhere, right? So I had the opportunity to work on Mount Rainier, right, for a company called International Mountain Guides. I was putting in a couple of seasons on Rainier, filling in the gaps of the Teton season. So I'd be on Rainier for the spring and the fall, and then working for IMG, they guide on an international level, highly touted company that covers a lot of the 7 summits. Started working on some of the higher peaks, right? Getting opportunities to go down to South America, Alaska, and then starting to meet other guides and other guide services. So then you sort of latch on to that and say, okay, oh well, there's an opportunity to go to Kilimanjaro. There's an opportunity to go to Elbrus in Russia. There's an opportunity to go to Antarctica. There's an opportunity to go to Peru or Bolivia. And a lot of that stemmed from relationships, not only in the Tetons, but obviously when I was spending time in the French Alps. I met Adrian Ballinger when I was in the Alps early on. I think he was taking maybe I was taking my advanced ski mountaineering course, and he was taking a ski exam. We became super close, and he had founded a company called Alpenglow Expeditions. And we formed an amazing relationship and friendship right away. And again, things really fell into place for myself. And I think a lot of folks you've had conversations with, we talk a lot about luck being 99% preparedness and 1% timing, right?
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot of variations to that. But for me, it was always, am I putting in the work behind the scenes, right? Am I doing the hard to make the easy? And those relationships, I attest to people not only wanting to put trust in me, but knowing that it was the right decision at the right time, not only for me, but for them, right? And I think that's the ultimate definition of mentorship. Someone in your field, a veteran, saying, hey, it's time, right? I think a lot about it was them saying, I'm leaving you here on the roadside, like my father has countless times. And just giving me the really hard nudge, not quite getting pushed off the cliff, but here's the really hard nudge. And we trust you to go run this Aconcagua trip. We trust you to go run this Elbrus trip. We know you've never been there, but you're an amazing mountain guy. You've got a great head on your shoulders. You're amazing at logistics and operations. You've got this. And it was, suddenly it's 15, 18, 20 years down the road of a lot of people that I looked up to saying, you've got this. Like, we trust you. We're not doubting you. And so much of that came unsolicited. I was approached by the owners, Rob Hess, obviously, but other owners of Jacksonville Mountain Guides. And they said, we want you to help build out our winter program, right? That was completely unsolicited. And I look back and say, wow, like, that was obviously an amazing opportunity for myself, but I can't imagine what it took for 3 business owners to come to some kid in his 20s, right?
Yeah.
Who hasn't been guiding that long. And then saying, super risky, right?
Yeah.
Like, here's our financials. Here's where we want to be. We'll give you some guardrails, but we trust you. And we want you to succeed, therefore we'll succeed, and everyone down the road will succeed, right? So I know I'm getting a little off topic here, but that's really been, the theme, right? It's been
what you're describing, and tell me if I'm off here, but it sounds like coming out, your childhood and high school, you had some level of confidence in your own ability to figure stuff out. You may not know how to do a thing, but I can figure this out. And people recognize that and say, I want to be around that guy because he's going to figure it out. But I would imagine the more people voted in confidence of you, it just built more and more bricks in the foundation for, I don't want to say fake it till you make it, but that it got to a point where you had all the confidence in the world because of the layers that people had laid into you. Is that fair how it played out?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I appreciate you laying it out that way, Josh, because I think we had spoke, this theme of confidence over competence is something I've consistently struggled with, but it's also something I recognize that has gotten me where I am today, right? Whether I have the confidence or not, I think that idea of just constantly battling doubt, but when you have the support system and you have this ecosystem, whether it's a guide service or, I've worked with people in, special operations, ex-Green Berets, ex-Navy SEALs, and I watched these men, hand over, hey, I want you to take care of this.
Wow.
We'll probably get to it, but being pushed into the executive coaching realm, like, having a Green Beret say, I think this is something you should be doing. I want you to take over a number of my programs, help me with some team leadership development, et cetera, et cetera. So I think we've all been in these situations where we feel like there's 100% doubt on our side, but there's 100% confidence coming from the other side. And you just have to, I think that's where I keep saying, like, if you're present and you're prepared and you have the opportunity presented, you've got to be, I'm not going to say an idiot, but you just have to recognize, like, I've got to trust my intuition. I've got to
Mm-hmm.
trust my gut here. And I think there's going to be some amazing things that come out of this situation.
So there was a really distinct question that just escaped my mind, but I do know where I wanted to see where you took it in taking that confidence that I can figure
Mm-hmm.
things out into a precarious situation that there
Mm-hmm.
maybe that there's no playbook for.
Totally.
So give me some examples there.
Oh man. I think, I guess I'll touch on this. I don't know if I've said it yet. This has been so many people that have been in the mountains with me, clients, friends, family, anyone that's been around me, whether it's a day, 10 days, the past 15 years, they've probably heard me say this. And my mantra has been suffer in comfort. And I know it sounds silly and it sounds counterintuitive.
What do you mean
Like,
by that?
so if you're going to suffer in comfort, right? If you know you're going to suffer, if you know you're going into something that's unknown and there's uncertainty, where can you sort of prepare, right? And make yourself comfortable. So when I think about suffering comfort, I think about, if I'm going to go guide the Grand Teton, and I know we don't have the greatest weather conditions, and I know maybe the client isn't the most prepared, what do I need to do on the back end to counteract a lot of the variables I can't control, right? So I just always think of it as what I can't control and what I can control. And there's so many avenues to this for me. And when I say suffer and comfort, to me it says, okay, I'm comfortable going into the situation based on who I am as a person, based on the skill set that I know that I have. I have trust in my skill set, and not only my skill set, but I have trust in the people I'm with, right? So I have trust in the people around me. I have trust in the systems around me. I think a lot about, people that have been rock climbing, or you think about a multi-pitch climb, or, we've all seen thankfully, a lot of this stuff is going mainstream, the movies and videos. You think about El Cap, right? It's like, we know we can trust the systems, but man, this is going to be really uncomfortable, right? But if we have the right tools and we employ the right tools at the right time, we're going to get through this. And I think for me, there's just so many analogies of, I've always said, coming off the Appalachian Trail at 18, it was like, okay, whatever's in my backpack, I want to make sure it's everything I need and nothing that I don't. And I've carried that through in life, right? So you think about moving across the country. Okay, do I have what I need? Do I have more than I need? If I do, get rid of that. So it's definitely, we've all heard the stories of, alpinism, fast and light, take only what you need. But for me, that whole suffer and comfort, that you've done the homework, you've prepared, you have a plan, you've worked on the logistics, you've worked on the operations side, you've educated not only yourself, you've educated the folks around you. And then I think, very similar to the conversations you've had with folks like Matt Walker and beyond, there are things we can't control, and it's going to be rugged, and it's going to be dirty, and we're going to get wet, and we're going to be cold, and we're going to be hungry. But then when you come back from that and you say, man, like, we pulled it off. And then
that gives you another layer in the foundation of, I can do these things.
Absolutely. I mean, think about anything hard that you've done, that I think about things that have been hard for me. And it's like, man, I wasn't sure what the outcome was going to be. But if I went into it with the mindset of, I'm going to prepare myself as best as I can, educate myself as best as I can, that will give me, right? It goes back to that confidence over competence, and being able to, I mean, I think about, there's not a mountain range in this world that I went to on a personal level before guiding, right? I was launched into, hey, we're flying you to St. Petersburg next week, and you've got 12 clients. You're going to meet them in St. Petersburg. You're going to take them to Mount Elbrus. Had never been there before, right? I'd never been to Kilimanjaro before I guided Kilimanjaro. I'd never been to Everest, right? I'd never been to the Himalaya. It was all, you go as either an assistant guide or apprentice guide or even senior guide sometimes, and you heavily depend on I have this skill set, right? I know how to work in the mountains. I know what risks and what hazards to look for. There's obviously a lot of things out of our control, but I'm going to do my best and show up prepared. And I think that mantra for me of suffering comfort has really been that overarching theme from you know being a teenager to hiking the trail to taking the Knowles course to taking AMGA courses and exams to becoming a certified guide to going on my first Himalaya trip. I mean, I think about the first time going heli-skiing, right? I've never skied that terrain. And you're in the front seat of a helicopter with 4 clients that perceive you as the professional, and you've got about 2.7 seconds to look at a 3,000-foot ski run. Talk about uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I just finished recording with another guy earlier this morning, and we had the similar conversation where it's interesting the way the human nervous system works. And I don't know this as a scientist, I know this from what I've read, but that our nervous systems can work off of each other, meaning like anxiety is contagious and vice versa. We can help each other calm down. But like if you're the calm expert that projects that we're going to figure this out, then I have a much better likelihood of picking that up and calming my own nervous system and allowing my prefrontal cortex to go to work and do the heavy lifting of problem solving, rather than the default mode network, which is just survive, right?
Absolutely.
And so in moments like that, where you're showing up somewhere that I mean, that's scary. Like, even if you're an expert, you're on a helicopter getting ready to go down a slope that you've never touched before. How did you calm yourself in such a way to be able to do it safely for yourself, but also project that towards your clients that you're taking out there?
Oh man, I love that, how you frame that, Josh, because I don't think people recognize that in the guiding landscape, right? It's not about you, and it is about the client, and it's about the client experience. And as you said, your emotions and feelings are projected time and time over, onto these people. And if you're uncomfortable and you're nervous, obviously that's going to affect the day, right? So don't get me wrong, there's been so many moments where I'm just starting to laugh sort of hysterically, like I have no idea how this is going to play out, but at least the folks I'm around are laughing and we're all gonna laugh together, and we're gonna get either up this mountain or down this mountain or down this ski run. And honestly, it for me, it's all that relationship building, right? You think about, we're not handing over trust right away. We're not handing over trust with the handshake. We're not handing over trust with the contract. We're not handing over trust with a client booking a trip or booking a coaching session, right? Those things are earned. And for me, it's always been, how do I earn that as quickly as I can? Because obviously sometimes it's needed within seconds or minutes, or maybe it's not needed completely, but I definitely need it for the next 12 seconds to either get down this rappel, or, we've got to get back to base camp today, or the weather's moving in fast, or snow conditions are changing, right?
So
now
how did you do that in a short amount of time?
Well, my wife would tell you it was probably my safety voice, which
Your safety voice.
about.
Okay. I've never heard that before.
Yeah, but honestly, I think, I'm hearing myself giggle a little bit. Like, if you could just lower the pressure a little bit, right? Make sure that not only yourself and the people around you know what? There is a lot out of our control right now, but we're going to depend on the skills and the guardrails that have been put in place, and we're going to venture into this together. And it doesn't always have to be a bunch of verbiage. It doesn't have to be like waving your ski pole and giving directions over a radio, right? Body language, having a little bit of a laugh, having a little bit of a giggle, making a joke about, man, I wish I would have pooped after my coffee this morning, right? Now I don't have time. We just got out of the helicopter, and our goal is to ski right now, right? So there's so much of that personal level that goes into the craft of what I consider outdoor education, right? I look back at my Knowles instructors, right? I look back at the outward bound instructors I met hiking the Appalachian Trail. I look back at the instructors and examiners I had through the AMGA. In those stressful situations, when you're being examined, when you're on point, when you're the person in the lead, yeah, you just have to let people know, like, this is going to be uncomfortable, not just for you, but probably for me. And I think it's body language, it's temperament, it's that little bit of a grin, it's that little bit of a nudge, that pat on the back. I mean, I don't know how many times I've just reached over and hugged, right? Hey Josh, give me a hug, man. This is about to be amazing. Like, this is truly about to be life-changing. High fives. I mean, holy, high five, I think, can go so far.
Interesting.
And I hope that, this may or may not be answering your question, but I'm hoping to get across here that there's all the technical aspects of any industry, right? There's the technical aspects of being a mountain guide. There's the curriculum and the education of becoming an executive coach.
But it's table stakes.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, yes, that's necessary, but that doesn't calm nerves. That doesn't get out of the dangerous spot that we find in.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I interrupted you there, but where were you going to finish that thought?
Yeah, I think it just going back to that mentality of knowing that if you come to the table prepared, right? If you enter whatever arena prepared, and you can applaud yourself and you can sit with yourself and say, I have done as much as I can to educate and to train and to have the skill set that I can lean on and truly depend on. I don't think there's anything greater going into the mountains or the outdoors, right? Because, let's say it, right? Like, on adventure, like we are looking for that unknown. We are looking, there are folks like you and I and a million of us out there. We want that unknown. We want to scratch that itch of, like, this is not what I expected.
Yeah.
But it's in that unexpected that we come home and we recognize, like, oh my gosh, the shower, right? The cold beer, the sitting with my family, the grilling the food for tonight, on a summer night where you're like, ooh, that was a long day in the mountains, just did 4 Grand Teton trips back to back. But yeah, I think just having those ups and downs, right? And I think knowing, like, yeah, it's going to be, I keep saying it, but, like, enjoying those moments of uncertainty and enjoying, because I think so many people recognize, well, uncomfortable or suffer in comfort, like, this is not going to be fun, or this is not going to be beneficial. The most benefit I've ever had from situations has probably been in those most uncomfortable situations.
Yeah. So that really gets to the question I like to dig into in these conversations. I mean, generally speaking, it's, why do you do this? Because on the outside, and I think this speaks more to our modern age of comfort at all costs, that when you look at someone that is choosing suffering, choosing danger, well, why would you do that? And then as soon as you finish, plan the next thing. Right. And I've said many times on this podcast, I believe that as a species, we really don't truly do anything unless there's some sort of reward that we're getting out of it. So let me see if I can pose this to you succinctly. Other than it being a job for you for so long, why did you continue to put yourself in moments of suffering? And you can even use this as an opportunity to speak to some of the danger that you were around and bad things that you saw happen. And then you did it over and over again. What do you think was the reward that you got out of it?
Oh man. Yeah. So, I mean, so many levels of reward, right? Levels of excitement, levels of accomplishment, right? So I think for me, I've always looked at it as how can I hold myself accountable? How can others benefit from that accountability? And what are the byproducts of that, right? So again, it goes back to, I have always found pleasure in being prepared. I've always found pleasure in being the guide behind the scenes, working on the CRM, working on P&L reports, working, all the things that most guys are like, get that away. I'm allergic to all of that. But to answer your question, right, for me, it's been this constant search of how do I better the customer experience, right? So whether it's a product, that product could be a program, that program could be a trip to Antarctica, right? Okay, well, how do I make that program better? Everything from start to finish. How do I make it better from the client calling to client asking questions, to the client booking, to the client actually going on the trip? So the reward, I think the reason, right, to answer your question of why, it's been this constant gratification of watching people not only be curious, right? So I applaud anyone that's curious and they endeavor into the uncomfortable. Watching people be uncomfortable, right? Because you're truly watching this person evolve right in front of your eyes. I mean, it could be seconds and it could be fleeting, but you're watching someone grow. You're watching someone, whatever level they are in their profession, right? I mean, my wife jokes that I should be doing keynotes around the world called Leading the Leaders. When you're pushing people that are professionals in their world, and now they're completely out of that world, and you get to be the one to place those guardrails and give some parameters, but also give them the lane to explore and become not only a better person, but recognize, hey, I am really fit. I did do the work. I trained super hard. Or, oh, wow, I'm not as afraid of heights as I thought I was. Like that rappel off the Grand Teton was amazing. Like I was nervous about it for 3 days, but oh, I did it. That's amazing. And I think stepping back and being the audience of 20 plus years of that, Josh, I couldn't ask for any more in my career path as a guy. And that's obviously folded over into the coaching world, right? I'm sure we'll touch on it now. It's the financial planning world. So being able to be the educator, being able to be the one to give that hard nudge that so many gave myself, and being the one to be present and say like, hey, I'm giving this person a high five because I literally just watched this person grow as not only a human, but as a friend, and knowing that they're going to go back home, or they're going to end this trip, or they're going to fly back to work on Monday morning, and they're going to walk through whatever that next door is, and they're going to have that, trying to bring it back to like, they're going to now have a little more confidence over competence, right? Because they're not professional climbers, they're not professional skiers, but I mean, heli skiing is one of those where you just take someone from amateur to professional in, again, like 2.7 seconds, and they get to go home and walk through the door and say, wow, like it wasn't necessarily the helicopter, it wasn't necessarily the ski run, it wasn't necessarily Valdez, Alaska, or Haines, Alaska, it wasn't necessarily the guide, right? It's not always about us as much as we think it is. But I got to go better myself, and I got to be present. And going back to Matt Walker, like I got to be present with others, and there was an audience for me, right, as a client. There was an audience for me as a guide. So I hope that answers that, because I know guiding is very personal, and I think coaching, and just like in your realm, financial planning, is very personal. I think people want to be too topical about it, but folks like us, we're pouring ourselves into this work, right? We're pouring ourselves into wanting to be responsible stewards for others. I think, the theme there is like, how do I educate professionals to be a professional in my world, right? Come climb a mountain, come on a heli-ski trip, sit down for a coaching session. And how can I take that level of professional and apply it for their next step forward?
Well, in the little bit of time in our conversation, it occurs to me, I think you have a pretty uniquely just servant heart in general, like wanting to make things better for other people, give them the opportunities to make things better for themselves. I don't think everybody has quite that bent. And so it makes sense that, you would do these kind of guiding and coaching things for so many years, because it would that's the reward for somebody that is bent that way. So,
Mm.
and by the way, like, you're going to be a good financial planner, because it is a knowledge industry that happens to sell products at times. And I think people get confused
Mhm.
to think that it's a product industry. It's not a product industry.
Right.
But at the end of the day, no one is going to care what you know if they don't
Hmm.
trust you. And
Absolutely.
so being a relationship business it absolutely is, whether you're selling a product or you're selling the advice that you give.
Hmm.
You have to be able to build a relationship with somebody in a genuine way that you care about what's in their best interest. Otherwise, they are not going to give a lick about what you have to say about anything.
Right.
And so I think you've probably already recognized the similarities in the financial industry compared to what you just described in the backcountry.
Hmm.
But it's not that different.
Yeah, I love that. I can't thank you enough for, again, you've been a quite the pillar for me these past couple of months as I endeavor into the, this next adventure. And yeah, again, I recognize not everyone's wired the way I am, and not especially working in the guide realm for as long as I did. It's not lost on me that there are some folks that the climbing and skiing is the passion, right?
Hmm.
But for me, I've always just said, look, I'm an educator at heart. The mountains have been the vehicle of that's been my classroom, right?
Hmm.
For 20 plus years. Layering in the coaching and leadership development practice over these past 3 to 4 years. It's just again, it's bringing people into a venue, but it's all been in the purpose of betterment, right? So how do we introduce people into these uncomfortable situations to sort of tease out, who they can be and who they want to be? And I feel very fortunate. I've had so many people over the years, and it's not always clients, right? Like, I always looked at my staff this way, whether it was colleagues, managers, directors, people I reported to, people that reported to me. No matter where it was in the hierarchy, I wanted to make things, the process and the processes and the procedures, I wanted to make things easy so everyone could focus more on the personal, right?
Hmm.
I think every industry, right? You just have all those, you have the hard skills and then you have the soft skills. And I always enjoyed being the person to sort of work behind the scenes, right? So I know that guides could go out the door and focus on guide. They didn't have to focus on
Yeah.
the reports and the finances and the rental gear and the sponsorships, right? And same with coaching, right? I want folks to come into a coaching session and know that it's like, I am here to push you into the uncomfortable and give you some guardrails and
Hmm.
help steer. But ultimately, I want to give people the freedom to be who they are, who they want to be, and watch them and obviously let them grow.
Yeah. So I think we'll maybe wrap up with you kind of describing this transition from the mountains to Southern California. But we haven't really touched on, and if you'll spend a couple minutes talking about some of the more dangerous situations that you've
Mm.
been in, or even sad. I know that you've had some tragedy occur at different times on the mountain.
Uh,
And I think if I remember correctly, you even were doing a rescue on the Tetons during a lightning storm or after a lightning storm that was described by one of my previous guests, that he was there on the mountain with his teenage son at that exact moment where they were hunkering down and trying to decide whether they were going to continue climbing. You were, racing right into the teeth of it to get
mhm.
somebody off the mountain. So any way you want to take that, I'd love to hear a few of
Yeah.
the
Oh
stories.
man. I mean, obviously, I could sit here and start, cataloging some stories. But yeah, as you mentioned, one, I'll just say, right, small world, small world.
Yeah.
You would introduce me, and yeah, come to find out, we were on the mountain at the same time years ago, and it just so happened to be during a bit of chaos. But yeah, I guess I'll start this conversation, or at least this topic. I recognized long ago, right, there is an expiration date, and as a mountain guide, as an industry professional that is prone to risk and hazard and things that you can't control, I think you have to be realistic about that, right? Obviously, it's a game of numbers. The longer you do it, the higher the chances are that something's going to go completely sideways. And it's something I don't think every human, or at least guide, is willing to face or is willing to be realistic about, right? There's a lot of folks I've seen over the years that they're like, I'm just going to keep going and going and going, and I know things can happen, but I don't really want to think about it. Now there comes a time where you have to think about it, and it's not that you chose to, but it's either, the doom and gloom. Like, it's either in your face, like you were helping move a body off of a mountain, you're helping triage an injury or maybe mass casualty, right? You've been involved, or you've watched a helicopter crash, or personally, right, like getting pulled out of a crevasse after a crevasse fall.
You're not talking hypothetical here. Like, every
Not
one of those
hypothetical.
things has happened to you.
Absolutely.
You were in
Yeah,
a helicopter crash.
I've been in what they call a hard landing.
Okay.
And then 2 years, I guess 3 seasons ago now, I've watched a helicopter during the heli-ski season, a helicopter crash about 40 meters away from myself and my clients, waiting to get picked up, and been involved in other aircraft aviation accidents as far as like body recovery. As we know, right, flying planes and helicopters around mountains, especially places like the Himalaya, it's not always the best outcome. And yeah, then you again think about the numbers game. You spend X amount of hours on a crevasse glacier, chances are you're probably going to fall in at some point, right?
Where did you
And
fall into one?
oh man. I mean, working on Mount Rainier, it's fairly common as guides are often scouting the route and getting routes put in, early season, late season, new snow coming in, covering things up. I've had some larger crevasse falls, and working in Alaska and in the Himalaya. Thankfully, no major injuries or fatalities in that regard. But then you think about, okay, other hazards in the mountains, right? You got everything from serac fall to ice fall, avalanches, right? So I've been swept over one too many cliffs for sure. Whether it was backcountry skiing in the Tetons, I made the paper. This is back in 2004, February 2004. I was on the front page of just the Jackson Hole Daily, though, the photo of the avalanche and the little article about how I survived. Countless avalanches working as a heli-ski guide, because again, you're often the one getting out there in front of folks and checking conditions.
And what is that
and then,
like? Getting swept over a cliff or getting caught in an avalanche?
I mean, I shouldn't be laughing, but I'm here today, thankfully, ahead of my expiration date. I hope it is. I won't lie, right? I'm sure you've heard these stories. It is completely life altering. Like, there are moments that you are thinking in those milliseconds, like, this is it. I'm not sure if I'm going to stop. I'm not sure if I'm going to get swept over another cliff. I'm not sure if I'm going to get smashed into a rock. Everything's getting twisted and tweaked, right? Whether that's your wrist, your ligaments, the skis getting pulled off, your backpack getting pulled in a different direction, your helmet getting filled with snow. So I mean, we've been at dinner parties before, and people hear about my background, and you can imagine the first question is like, have you almost died? And my wife always jokes. She's like, well, how much time do you have? Because he probably has 30 of these stories where it's like, I thought it was lights out. I thought it was in the heat of the moment, like, okay, this is how it's ending.
And you kept going back. Was it no? And I don't say that like to make fun of you. Like, I get it, but was the call back? Was it truly to continue, like the service to others? Is it what continued to bring you back?
Yeah, I can confidently say that, like, zero hesitation. Hazards aside, right? Consequences of an injury or possible fatality aside, the level of gratification, the level of just excitement, right, of watching other people push themselves in the mountains, or pushing themselves to meet their goals and push through those goals to meet the next goal, it overrode everything, right? I mean, I think about, as a heli-ski guide, you maybe get in a small slide, or what people might consider a larger slide, and 4 minutes later, you're standing on another run. Or maybe you have a pretty bad day and you're like, wow, I was in an avalanche yesterday and I'm not really sure what does that mean for today. And there you are, getting in the helicopter the next day and the day after that. And the reason is because it may not be the same clients or it may be different clients, but you're recognizing, hey, I get to, again, high five these folks. This is maybe an opportunity of a lifetime, and my job and the reason I do this job is to push people into that uncomfortable and steer them in a way that they're going to go home as a better person. And it might seem counterintuitive to say I could, like, you have to face that. I could die in an avalanche. I could die getting struck by lightning. I could die in a helicopter crash, right? Like, there's just countless of moments in the mountains, especially I think, guiding in the Himalaya as long as I did. And you're like, this is not a joke. Like, this is truly that razor edge that people talk about, right? Like,
yeah,
when conditions change and things are not going your way and you have seconds to react. So it's wild. I recognize that. It's not lost on me, mentioning some of this stuff. It might seem a little abrasive or coarse to not give it the service and attention that it needs, right? I certainly don't want to downplay the hazards that have come with my background. But I don't think I'd be the person that I am today. And obviously, people forget that when they see someone doing adventurous things, right, or what we deem adventurous or scary or risky, those are some of the most calculated people I've ever met, right?
Okay.
It's folks that have planned and prepared and trained and looked at maps for weeks, maybe years. They've looked at options. They know their escape routes. They know this is where our next supply is going to be. We know the logistics. We know our safety nets, right? I think the problem with some of this stuff going mainstream is people just don't see the behind the scenes. They don't understand that as a risk manager, as a mountain guide, a risk manager, or as an executive coach, as a risk manager, we are calculating all the variables into play, right? Because we don't want that to be the unknown. We want the adventure with folks to be the unknown. We don't want the hazards to be the unknown.
Yeah, makes sense. So what was the tipping point to making the transition out of mountain guiding?
Oh, well, as I mentioned, people, a lot of folks around me have heard me say for years, I just want to stay ahead of that perceived and real, right, expiration date. So I think for me, the older I've gotten, right, you start to really pick and choose who you want to be in the mountains with. I think a lot of mountain guides are very good at marketing themselves, marketing who they enjoy being with, finding alignment with certain clients, and knowing that, hey, it's not just a risk management tool going into the mountains with folks that you know and trust, but it obviously makes for a more enjoyable experience. For me, that just, it did hit a point where I think becoming a father, recognizing that I had a string of significant injuries that required a couple of different surgeries, you just start to question, right? And so I've been phasing out of mountain guiding for probably feels like 5 or 6 years at this point.
So it's been like a phase process.
Yeah, definitely not overnight. I think it's one of those things that I'm trying very hard to sort of stay in the lane that I am now, but you definitely hear that call of, well, maybe this trip, or maybe if that client called, I would entertain that trip. But yeah, it's definitely been it has not been overnight. It's been a internal battle, right? It's definitely one of those where you're letting go of maybe who you were at a certain point and recognizing that there's a chance to be someone, again, going back to the theme, like, if I can better myself and educate myself in a new realm and push myself into a new chapter, right, where I'm consistently learning and not settling, then I'm going to take those opportunities. And as of late, right, you mentioned working now, trying to build up my own practice as a financial planner, to layer in the work I've been doing as a coach and team leadership developer. It's given me the opportunities to bring all of those skills from the guide world to many of the same clients, right? And obviously new clients that I look forward to working with. It just doesn't have the appeal of I get to go climb the Grand Teton, 15 times a summer, or I get to work in the Andes for a season, or I get to the Himalaya this year. So as we know in life, right, there's seasons for everything, and I've tried to set myself up for being prepared for the next season, right? And again, being prepared to stay ahead of that dreaded expiration date.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really, really insightful, and you've given a great amount of detail to your process and the way you've thought through these, which I think is really helpful for anyone that listens to these conversations that are looking for ways to push the limits of their own life. It may not be scaling the Tetons or El Cap, but there's something, some area in all of our lives where we can push the boundary just a little bit more, more. And for me, when I've done that, which I'm not, the always consistent with it, but when I've done that, it's when I feel most human, most alive,
Totally.
right?
Yes.
Like I'm still here and this is pretty fun.
Yep.
But it's when the limits aren't pushed that I think atrophy kicks in and you get stuck in the same place, and that's pretty miserable, but it's easy to stay there.
It is, right? I mean, it's not lost on me. I've had the fortunate opportunity to see a lot of this world. I know many folks won't have those opportunities, but knowing that travel is uncomfortable, right? Putting yourself in these situations isn't always the easiest decision, or sometimes it is the easiest decision to say, you know what? No, I'm gonna stay home. But as you mentioned, Josh, like anyone that's experienced self-growth, there was many components of hardness to that, right? There were many layers of feeling uncomfortable and uncertain and having those levels of doubt. I think as I've grown as a human and now as a parent, I recognize, I think as of many parents do, who do we want to portray for the future generations? And that has actually helped me shift into these new arenas a lot easier than I think it would have been without being a parent. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of days where I think many of us would say, I would love to just keep climbing and skiing and fly fishing and hiking with my dog.
Yeah.
But when priorities change, and as we talked earlier, the paradigm has shifted, and don't get me wrong, I cannot wait to guide my son up the Grand Teton, get him in his first helicopter, for a ski run in Alaska or Canada, or take him on a safari in Africa.
I was going to say that too. We've kind of been talking about this, about it's been either or. You were in the mountains for a while, now you're not, and but it can be a both and. Like
great, yes, thank you.
And especially as your son gets older and more capable of doing things, I can envision it being that way for you.
Yeah, no, it's definitely been a process, right? And a process of acceptance and a process of change. But I think ultimately it's one of those. If my personality has never allowed me to just settle for, and I don't say that in a negative sense, right? I've always been looking for ways to again find what's next. Like, how can I educate myself in this realm, right? And I do attribute that to, as a guide, we're exposed to people from all walks of life, and you have these discussions, you have these intimate conversations, and you have these little snippets, and you latch on to those conversations that that speak to your personality. And I think that's the benefit. Like, people don't recognize that when I was guiding someone in the mountains, their takeaway might be, okay, I just climbed a mountain, right? And my takeaway was, wow, I learned so much about wine. I learned so much about the stock market. I learned so much about the hospitality industry, right? And you just start to think, okay, well, where do my passions lie? How do I keep the momentum moving forward that will align with said passions and said beliefs? And I think as we all get older as humans, we recognize, like, it's a pretty simple process. Like, find things that make you happy and find things that make you uncomfortable and just try everything under the sun if and when there's a chance.
That's cool. That's probably a good way to wrap this up. Brian, you spent a lot of time with me today. I greatly appreciate that. And, we'll stay in touch. And I think that where this first intersection was maybe more serendipitous timing, maybe there's a point in the future where we can be intentional and meet in person. So thanks again. I really appreciate you doing this.
Absolutely. I can't thank you enough, Josh. This has been very sincere dialogue, and it's given me a chance to actually see that there has been a bit of a planned path at this point. So
very good.
Can't thank you enough. And yeah, I look forward to hopefully next time speaking on the podcast, or you and I getting out into the mountains.
Sounds good. All right. Thanks. Thanks for listening to another episode of the On Adventure podcast. Be on the lookout for another episode dropping in a couple weeks. And be sure to go to our YouTube page and subscribe and follow us there, as well as on all the socials from Facebook to Instagram and LinkedIn. Until our next episode, I hope you stay safe and stay on adventure.